All right, this is so nice.
Good afternoon. What's happening? How y'all feel out there?
I'm so excited to be here. I am happy to be here for the Wellness Festival, but also just to be asking questions to a legendary question asker himself, Charlamagne Tha God, who co-hosts of Breakfast Club, a morning show that Google tells me has more than 4 million weekly listeners. And he's also the best-selling author of 2 books, Shook One, Anxiety Playing Tricks on Me, and Get Honest or Die Lying.
We don't have to do all of that. I'm
I
happy to
do,
be
though.
here.
I actually literally
oh, you do? Oh, I'm sorry.
But beyond that, he's also become a leading voice in just pop culture, and more recently, politics. And as I was doing the kind of research to ask some of these questions, I was really struck by just the level of vulnerability you bring to your work, the level of openness you bring to your work. And I wanted to start there. Have you always felt comfortable with that, or is that something you had to grow into?
I think as a radio personality, media personality, I've always chosen to be transparent. But I think it's a difference between being transparent and being vulnerable, right? Like, it's easy to talk about, a lot of the things that may be on the surface, but it's a lot harder to talk about the things that may be deeper. And a lot of times those things that are deeper, unless you're actually out there doing the work on yourself in some way, whether it's, through therapy or through whatever healing journey you're on, you don't even know how to be vulnerable. So I've always prided myself on being transparent, but I think vulnerability is something that's happened to me in the later stages of my life.
What took that? What was the moment for you that kind of caused you to transition in the ways that you're identifying from being open and transparent to saying, actually, there's real power in me being more vulnerable, more deep? Was there something that triggered that?
Well, to go back to the transparency part, in my first book, which is a New York Times bestseller, shameless plug. I have a principle in there called Live Your Truth, and it's like the Eminem and 8 Mile theory is what I call it. Because if you've ever seen Eminem and 8 Mile, in that final rap battle, everything that his opponent was going to say to him, he said about himself. So I would always say, live your truth so nobody can use your truth against you. So in 2016, when I started to go to therapy because I wanted to get a handle on my anxiety and my bouts of depression, when I started going to therapy, I was sharing that with my listeners, the fact that I was going every Friday at 3 o'clock, to the point that it became a running joke, like, oh, he's going to therapy every Friday at 3 o'clock. But then I think over time, people started to say, like, yo, I think he's actually really doing the work. Like, there's a shift, there's a change, and that just led to me kind of finding my village in a way. Because when I started to have that conversation on the radio and telling people that I was going to therapy for my anxiety and my depression, I was being transparent with them, but it was also like kind of a cry for help in a way, because I was just trying to get a handle on my issues. And then when I started having that conversation, people would come up to me and say, oh, my husband started going to therapy because of you, or my brother started going to therapy because of you, or my uncle started going to therapy because of you, or my son started going to therapy because of you. And it just became like this thing where it's just like, oh, not only when you live your truth, nobody can use, your truth against you. When you live your truth, you kind of like just find a tribe that gives you more strength, to continue doing the work.
I like that, Eminem and 8 Mile theory. You talk in your books about the stigma around therapy and vulnerability. How did you navigate those, specifically considering the kind of hip-hop culture you have come up with? And I think specific to our identity, I think, or was a specific stigma you think had to be overcome as a man, as a black man?
There is nobody who's ever listened to, hip-hop music, and you cannot hear the anxiety, the bouts of depression, the unhealed trauma that certain individuals may be going through. Like, I named my second book, Shook One, Anxiety Playing Tricks on Me. And both of those are plays off hip-hop titles. Shook One is an ode to Mobb Deep, but, what was considered a shook one was just a scared person. We would just call him a punk back then, but, that person was probably dealing with a lot of insecurities and, a lot of fears, and, they were putting on this brave face, wearing a mask, so to speak, because they didn't want to necessarily reveal themselves to people. So you would call a person that was afraid shook. But if you go back to the Ghetto Boy song, Mind Playing Tricks on Me, which I switched to Anxiety Playing Tricks on Me. You go listen to that song, everybody in that record is dealing with, some form of, depression or some form of anxiety, for the world that they're living in. A song like Beanie Siegel, Feel It in the Air. So I feel like a lot of these rappers were already expressing a lot of these things. It's just that when I started going to therapy, I started to talk about those issues with actual language.
Right, naming it.
Naming it. And I think, that's happening more now. I mean, you got great films like In and Out, right? No, Inside Out, I'm sorry. Like Inside Out, and it gives people like the language. And I think that's a good thing, man, because, once you start going to therapy and you learn what's, actually going on with you and you're able to express that, then you can get on your healing journey, because that's two totally different things.
Yeah.
Recognizing what you're going through, but then actually going on a healing journey to fix it, that's two different lanes.
Yeah, yeah. Do you have any specific methods or tools that you use to deal with your anxiety? And are there best practices that you have learned since going on that healing journey?
Oh, I've done them all. I mean, meditation, plant-based medicine, which is just drugs. Therapy. I've literally done it all. And I mean, my day when I wake up in the morning, first thing I do is pray. And then, I have 2 daily affirmation books that I read out of. I love Ryan Holiday's The Daily Stoic, and I love Robert Greene's Daily Laws. And then I try to do at least 5 minutes of meditation. And then, just even driving into work, you got to set your tone for the day, because as soon as we get into the office or, go look at our phones, that peace that we've been building up is going to be disrupted in some way, shape, or form. You cannot escape it. So you at least have to make sure that when you wake up in the morning, you have a routine that, gets you in the proper mental space that you want to be in. But I've literally done them all. My favorite is meditation. Now that it's warm out, I love grounding. I love going outside in the yard, taking my shoes off, and, just walking in the grass. I have a sacred purpose coach, who I've talked to a lot, and her name is Yadi Alba. And, we take grounding to a whole other level because, I'll lay down on the ground, and we literally call it face down, ass up. Now, I know, that's like a Uncle Luke 2 Live Crew thing, but it actually does work, because I grew up in the country, man. I grew up in South Carolina where, we would run around the yard, as kids. And I think that we've all lost that, connection with nature. So anytime you feeling anxious, you feeling, that bout of depression coming on, just try something as simple as taking your shoes off and just walking through some grass. People say that as a joke, man, go touch grass. Go touch grass.
Yeah.
And watch what happens.
Is there any way that the journey has changed how you approach your work? Is there a tangible difference in how you go about your job because of the kind of reflection and therapy journey you've been on?
Yeah, absolutely. Because, there was times early in my career where you'd see certain publications and they might label me, the hip-hop Howard Stern. And you like, damn, what does that even mean, right? But, I'm a person I've read Private Parts and I've watched Private Parts and I've definitely listened to Howard Stern growing up. So it's like, oh, does that mean I need to be wild? Do I need to be crash? Do I need, what do I need to do that? And that's performative, right? When you actually strip away that mask and you stop performing and you're, in therapy every week and you're really, really, really doing the work on yourself, you don't have no other option except for to bring that real version of you to, whatever it is that you're doing. And man, I've been doing radio, it'll be 27 years this year. So I started in 1998. So I don't know.
That's impressive consistency.
Yes, but it's also because of the internet, there's this multiverse of Charlamagne. So I don't know what version of me a person could be seeing at any given moment in time. And every single version of me has grown. If you're actually doing this life thing right, you will grow, you will evolve. If you're a person that's been consistently, showing up in a space the same way, for years and years, are you growing? Are you evolving? Muhammad Ali said the man who thinks at 50 the same way he did at 30 has wasted 20 years of his life. You know, I don't feel like I've wasted a year because I allow myself to grow and evolve. So to ask your question, of course, you know, the approach to whatever it is I'm doing will evolve.
I guess how I originally come to know you as one of the listeners and things, sometimes folks like that confrontation. They like the more combative tone from the radio host. I'm saying, was there any way as you have evolved that you had to even wrestle with your own fans and the version of Charlamagne they expected to show up?
Yes, I mean, there's people now that's like, oh, I don't like when you talk all that mental health shit. Oh, I'm sorry. That mental health stuff, right? But it's like, that's not for you. That's for me, and it's for whoever it receives, whoever receives it in that moment. You know what I mean? Like, like I said, I'm not performing. I'm showing up as my true, authentic self. So whatever I'm on in that moment is what I'm on, and whoever it's supposed to impact, you know, it's going to impact.
So when that moment, when they come up and say, you know, I don't like when you talk about mental health, you're just unconcerned. You say, you know what? You know, you take it or leave it, but this is who I am.
I have to do what's best for me. You know, I can't, you know, we talk about being a service, right? I truly believe that your true purpose in life is service to others, but you cannot serve anybody else if you're not first serving yourself. But you got to be serving yourself, you know, the right way. If I know that I'm serving myself the right way and I'm actually doing things that I know are helping to, you know, better me as an individual, why wouldn't I share that with the people who listen to me every single day?
Mm-hmm. What barriers do you think still prevent maybe Black communities specifically from accessing or trusting mental health care? Because I know you've talked about some of that in your books. And what are the ways you think are most effective in terms of breaking those barriers down?
I think it's a couple of things. You know, I think number one, it's a lack of resources, right? Like, you know, when you do realize you have, you know, some issues that you need to take care of, you kind of really don't even know where to go. And I also say, you know, we don't do ourselves any favors by keeping secrets. You know, we keep a lot of secrets amongst each other. Like, everybody in here has a family who probably got a whole bunch of different secrets, right? And I don't think we do ourselves any favors by keeping secrets. When I put out my second book, which was Shook One Anxiety Playing Tricks on Me, which was literally about the things that I was learning in therapy. Mind you, I didn't even really want to do a second book, right? It's just that when you have a successful first book, your book agent comes and your book agent is like, yo, you really need to put out another book. And I'm like, I just gave you my whole life, you know, up until a certain point in my first one. And unbeknownst to you, I've been going to therapy for the last, you know, year, and I don't know anything. Everything I thought I knew about life is completely out the window.
And they say, hey, that's the second book.
Right? Now, that is true, but I'm gonna tell you something. Me and my book agent are actually friends. We became friends before we decided to go in business together. So when her name is Jan Miller, salute to Jan Miller. When Jan is a beautiful person if you know Jan. So when I was expressing that to Jan, because I felt comfortable enough telling her that, like, Jan, man, I'm gonna tell you something. I've been going to therapy, and like literally everything I thought I knew about life, I have no clue about. I am just trying to figure things out right now. I said I have been keeping a journal, you know, of things that I've been learning in therapy. And so I did share some of that with her. And she was saying how if you wanted to, if you chose to, this would be very powerful, right? But I didn't feel like that was the right thing to do because I'm not an expert at any of this. So she was like, well, what if we put a therapist in the book, my guy, Dr. Ish Major, and they gave clinical correlations to the things that you were talking about. And so, you know, I did that. And so when I put that book out, it was November of 2018, and I was home in Moncks Corner, South Carolina for Thanksgiving, and my dad had read the book, and I had a cousin who was 25 years old, and he had attempted suicide 4 different times. On the 4th time, he actually completed suicide. And it was the week of Thanksgiving, and my dad called me, and he was like, yo, I read your book, and then he was talking to me about my cousin who completed suicide, and then my dad said, you know, hey, man, I was going to therapy 2 and 3 times a week. And, you know, I tried to commit suicide 30 plus years ago. And I was on 10 to 12 different medications for my mental health. And I remember just thinking to myself, wow, if you would have told me this years ago, then I would have known what that anxiety was I was experiencing. I would have known what those bouts of depression was I was experiencing. And I remember asking my mom, I said, yo, you know Dad was going through all of this? And she said to me, yeah, I thought he was just playing crazy to get a check, right? So my point is, there's no need for any of us to keep secrets from each other. Like if we was to tell each other what it is that we're going through, and even better, the things that we did to get through what we was going through, we would all do ourselves a big favor. Yeah.
It feels as if you have been a part of kind of pushing culture into, embracing more open discussion around mental health. You've said yourself, healing is gangster. I was wondering about where you think we need to go next, and what are the ways that you still think, what are the areas you still feel haven't caught up?
I think the healing aspect. I think that, we have a generation of people right now, like I said earlier, who are learning the language, who may be going to therapy and realizing what it is they're actually dealing with. But then now you got to go do that really hard work of going on a healing journey, right? Like, okay, yeah, you got anxiety, you got depression, you got PTSD, you got trauma because of things that happened to you as a child. But what journey are you going to go on to give that, inner child in you actual healing? I mean,
recognition is step one.
Absolutely. And I think that, that's something that everybody in this room is going to learn. I don't know how old y'all are, but I was born in 1978. So I'll be 47 this year. I am from the 1900s, okay? And as you get older, what you're going to realize is every day of your life as an adult is just a battle with your inner child. And there's a version, there's a 5-year-old version of you, a 9-year-old version of you, a 10-year-old version of you, a 15-year-old version of you. All of these different versions of you did not get the healing that they probably needed in that moment. They didn't get the resources they needed in that moment. So as an adult, it's your job to get that inner child that healing. And so that's literally what I think everybody needs to be focusing on. That's the next level of these, conversations we're having around mental health and mindfulness, actually going on a real healing journey.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that even I struggled with going from writing in the newspaper to doing a podcast is listeners feel a much closer sense of connection to you, a sense of ownership about your ideas. They know you. And so when people come up to you with a sense of who you are, at first I was kind of off-put by it. But I had to kind of recognize they do know you more. It is a more intimate medium, and that vulnerability as you're laying out is what gives it power. I wanted to know how you kind of dealt with that. Like, because so much of you is out there, do you ever get uncomfortable with how you've negotiated that? Are there parts of you you've had to reserve to yourself?
That's a fantastic question. Like I said earlier, it's like a multiverse of all of us, but especially when you're in the public eye. So it's kind of like if somebody comes up to me and says, or I hear, I don't like him for whatever reason, I don't even get mad because I don't know what you saw. I don't know what version of me you saw. I don't know what you saw, what I said, like it's because it's so many different, moments in time that you could probably, pull from. But I would tell people, man, don't think you know me, because the reality is I don't even know myself. Like, if you're doing this life thing right, you're going to surprise yourself all the time, right? And if you're doing this life thing right, there's levels, right? You're gonna grow, you're gonna evolve, and you should find, there should be different moments in your life where you don't recognize who you are in a good way. And you should think about who you used to be and be like, who the F was that? Like, I think that is a perfectly, that's a perfectly like stable and very self-aware place to be.
I like that. You've had a transition over the last several years, speaking out more on politics and things past. I kind of think where you've started in terms of pop culture. What's next? Like, is that type of evolution one we're going to continue to see? Do you have places in kind of culture or society that you want to be that you're not?
It's so funny. People say that. They're like, oh, you talk politics now. I've always talked politics. It's just nobody cared. Nobody cared when I was.
Yeah.
There's never been a time I haven't, spoken about politics. Because, like I said, even when you go back to the rappers, like rappers were always talking about things of socially redeeming value. Rappers were always, talking about the government, right? And it's just like, if you listen to hip hop, if you read something like the autobiography of Malcolm X, if you've ever done research on anybody like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Marcus Garvey, whoever it is. I'm from South Carolina. We had Denmark Vesey. Like, there was always politics. You always knew, about a system that was marginalizing certain groups. That's all politics. We all know about different legislation that has held, black people back.
You're hosting the Daily Show now, right? Like that's a different type of kind of a place to be politically, right?
Yeah, but But like I said, I'm 46 now, so I probably wasn't built for that, 20 years ago. And 20 years ago, even when I was having those conversations, like I said, nobody cared. Like this isn't new. Like even if you go back to I'll keep it as simple as the Breakfast Club because that's where I've been the last 15 years. The first person we ever, interviewed that was in the political realm was my guy Bakari Sellers. This was 2014. Me and Bakari came up together, in South Carolina. We was in the clubs, drinking lots of Hennessy back in the day, okay? Right? Like, that's who we were. So I've always known Bakari, know the story of his father. So when he was running for lieutenant governor of South Carolina, of course I'm going to have my guy on. And Bakari was a person who was telling other people in politics way back then, yo, these are the type of shifts that y'all need to start making. These are the spaces that y'all need to start showing up in. And then when you had people like, Bernie Sanders, who was out here with Killer Mike and Nina Turner and Teslin Figueroa, who are very much of culture, but also very much of that political world, they were telling him, you need to go on Breakfast Club. And then same thing with Hillary Clinton, when all her people was around her, all the black women she had around her, they were telling her, you need to go on Breakfast Club. And then that's when it started to get a little weird.
I mean, you all had like a whole primary on the Breakfast Club.
Well,
Every single one of the candidates.
This is way before the primary.
Yeah.
The reason I say it started to get a little weird, because they was like, all right, you got to go through a vetting process. And I'm like, a vetting process? And they're like, yeah, you got to go through a vetting process of, because we want to know who you are. And, have you ever said anything crazy about this person? And it was so funny because there was a time I had on a Hillary Clinton mask for Halloween, and I wore a tracksuit. And I was like doing like this crazy dance, and it's like, they saw that, and fortunately, they just thought it was funny. And so then she ended up, coming on Breakfast Club twice, actually. Yep.
I want to end this with the question back where we started, focusing on kind of mental health. You talked about generational trauma. I wanted you to just share something that you felt like a personal story. What did you have to unlearn, and how did you go about that process, and how has it pushed you to grow?
We don't even have the time to begin to unpack that. I mean, one thing that I really unlearned that really has helped me as a man is the grace I ended up giving my father, because that's what therapy did, right? When I first started going to therapy, I'm going to therapy for anxiety and depression, but then you start peeling back all of these layers of unhealed trauma, and I started to realize, like, I got real father issues, right? Like, we always talk about daddy issues, and they kind of just regulate it to women, which is strange. Like, men, we long for that relationship, with our father. And I remember one of the first breakthroughs I had in therapy, like it just had me boohoo crying, was when I realized that my dad used to discipline me for things he never actually taught me. And so it was a period of my life where, I wanted my dad to like really, really be there for me. And even still now, like, I'm trying to really develop that real father-son relationship. But the reason I was able to give him so much grace is when he told me about the fact that he was in therapy 2 and 3 times a week, that he was on 10 to 12 different medications, that he attempted to commit suicide. I remember going to see him at rehab, like because he had substance abuse issues too. I remember that. They never told me it was rehab, but as I got older, I'm like, oh, that was rehab. And, my dad was locked up with Marion Barry in the 90s. Not locked up, he was in rehab with Marion Barry in South Carolina. That's a whole other story. But when he told me all of those things, it just allowed me to give him so much grace, because I realized he was just a man dealing with life the same way we all are just men, dealing with life. And that was a big, big, big thing for me, man, because I went through it in therapy, because I was like, yo, I love my dad. But then I was like, yo, I hate my dad. And then I was like, no, I do love my dad. And then when I realized what my actual issue with him was, it wasn't, it was the fact that, the infidelity with my mom and all of that type of stuff, but it was actually because he disciplined me for things that he never taught me. And I just wanted him to be a father, right? Like really be there for me. And so that was something that helped me to show up as a better father. Because I think that we all, forget our parents had a life before they were our parents. And I think that we don't treat them like just the human beings that they are. So for me, the way I raise my 4 daughters is by being as open and vulnerable with them as I feel like I can in that moment. And most importantly, apologizing when I get it wrong. Like if I do something that I know may upset them or do something that I might be projecting on them, I just apologize for it. And that's something that I think all of us need to do as parents. Apologize to your kids when you get it wrong.
Listen, so many people don't get that moment. So many people don't do that hard work. And so many people aren't open and vulnerable about it. So thank you. And Charlamagne Tha God, everybody.
Peace.